Mage Storytime, Episode 12. Greed is Good. This is the continuing story of the Iron Goldfish, a party of role-players who awakened as mages. Our cast includes Alwi, who manipulates time with his phone; Bard, a mind and spirit mage who uses superheroes as his gods; Critical, who improves the luck of others through his own pain; Handy, a correspondence-using thief who steals items at long range; Kitty, who empowers his stickers and cats with spirits; Telo, a postmodern mage who uses a hodgepodge of skills to manipulate forces and matter; and Weeb, who uses his life skills to enhance his martial arts and Chinese medicine. We had finally defeated the Bane spirits infesting the mall and claimed the node near our shop for ourselves, and it only took us 3 months. With the added protection from our new vampire friends/consultants, the financial attacks on the store seemed to be waning as well. All in all, things were going well for the Iron Goldfish when we met up again. Lord Archeon's task still loomed over us. We were no closer to figuring out the real culprits behind the Fae killings. I say real culprits because we had decided the 2 Tremere vampires we had met were far too chill to be bloodthirsty killers. After all, we had known them a whole week, and it didn't sound like the kind of thing they would do. And they'd given us good business advice. Would killers do that? Of course not. Part of that business advice had been to contact the spirit of capitalism and try to sick it on the technocracy, hoping it would be angered by their bureaucratic limitation of free enterprise. Bard spoke to his superheroes, Weeb talked to Coyote, Kitty met with Baron Samedi, and Tello asked the thunder god Raijin, whom she had contacted on her own some time before and got to guard our store. In short, we were fairly well connected in the spirit world, and were quickly able to get a lead on the spirit of capitalism. Our various gods described it as greedy and powerful in the modern age, which was to be expected, but none of them cared to interact with it overmuch, as they all described it as alien. They told us it could be summoned pretty much anywhere capitalism was happening. Stores, banks, stock exchanges, and the like. Although it was drawn more to larger places, it could be found everywhere, and being located at a store in a mall, we figured we had enough localized commerce occurring to satiate it. We considered sacrificing a poor ethnic person in a blood ritual, as that seemed a very capitalistic thing to do, but decided we were too squeamish. And good. Ish. Based on how these spirits had been manifesting themselves in our experience, we decided the spirit would probably present itself as some sort of pop culture figure. Specifically, we expected a certain top hat-wearing Scottish duck, and decided to use the sorts of things he might like to try to summon him. As offerings, we procured the nicest champagne, caviar, and cigars our modest budget could afford, as offerings of drink, food, and incense. We decided simple was best with the music, and used the cling of our cash register opening and closing as a percussive beat. Then we purchased a kiddie pool and filled it with $1,000 worth of pennies. Finally, Tello enacted a ritual and gold-plated the entire affair. We could have tried to turn it to real gold, but the kiddie pool would have deflated under its own weight. Weeb and Alwi got in and started doing their best to swim around in the gold coins, in an attempt to turn their actions into sympathetic magic and call the spirit. Since they were full-grown men, they could only splash around some, but it was the thought that counted. It was some time before the spirit appeared, and when it did, it didn't look nearly as fluffy as we expected, but it was familiar. A small male figure stood before us in what was obviously a tailored suit, despite its odd colorings and pseudo-futuristic cut. The individual himself was even stranger. He had orange-brown skin, sharp-pointed teeth, and massive ears. They ran from his chin to the top of his bald head, where 2 lobes protruded over his brow. He stepped through the door from the back room of the shop, and past him we could see a futuristic-looking bar. "Well, what can I do for you fine people? You're obviously keen to see me, so what'll it be? And get out of the pool, you look ridiculous. You're supposed to wait until you're in private to do that sort of thing." "Oh my god, are you really him?" asked Bard, recognizing the character from sci-fi television. "Of course not. He's fictional. But he so represents my whole reason for being. What's not to love about a race that has rules like profit is its own reward? Now, again, what can I do for you?" We explained the attacks we had been suffering from the technocracy. Excesses of fines, fees, and legal setbacks designed to cost us money and hamper our group's ability to operate, and ultimately to even exist. At the mention of potential audits, the spirit gasped in horror. "Why, that's downright detrimental to free enterprise. It's insulting. I can understand why you want something done, and why you came to me. I'll be happy to help. For a reasonable fee, of course. As the rule says, what's in it for me?" We asked him what sort of currency he accepted, and were told that any legal tender would do. Even ancient ones like large circular stones or cowrie shells. If we didn't have any cash to hand, he would also accept fame and exposure. More believers, more business people and entrepreneurs would strengthen him. We suggested statues, but he said every bank was a statue to him already. We thought of plush figurines, and while he liked the idea, he pointed out that his current manifestation was copyrighted, and we would never get CBS on board. Finally, always suggested that, if he would help us in our planned, well, hypothesized at this point, raid on the technocracy stronghold, while we were in there we could steal him an offering from their bank accounts. The only thing better than an offering was an offering that cost your enemies. The alien spirit seemed intrigued by this idea, but pointed out that the technocracy did have entire departments devoted to cybersecurity. This deflated our enthusiasm somewhat, as our collective tech savvy mostly consisted of Googling how to do something. While that put us ahead of plenty of people some of us had dealt with in customer service, we weren't ready to go up against anything like what the technocracy had. Thinking along the same lines, Weeb suggested we could instead steal him a donation from another god. This got a hearty laugh from the spirit of capitalism, and a death glare from the more reverent party members. But it was too late. The spirit latched onto the idea and declared it perfect. After some more haggling, we were able to convince the spirit to aid us if we supplied an offering stolen from another god or spirit, and we had to give him the pool of gold-plated coins. We considered it a pretty good deal for such a powerful spirit, and after signing an ironclad contract which he produced and we all read thoroughly — we may be crazy, but we're not stupid — the deal was struck. He stepped back through the door and into his bar, and we congratulated ourselves on having struck a good bargain. Now we just had to figure out how to fulfill our end of it. Making the pool of gold-ish coins hadn't been much of a problem. The real trouble was swiping an offering from another god. Or rather, how to do it without making an enemy of said god or potent spirit and getting ourselves smote. The first idea suggested was that we simply rob a church. After all, Christianity was supposed to be about giving, and they typically had plenty of money. Plus, we were in Texas, so there were plenty to choose from. Everyone looked to the two celestial choristers for objections. Bard was unsure, but figured so long as we stuck to megachurches we would probably be okay. God would find it ironic if we stole from them, and Bard doubted if he would mind if we stole from one of the homophobes. Critical, who was the more reverent, put his foot down. No robbing houses of worship. We were supposed to be the good guys. He didn't care for the snide remarks the rest of us made about that, but he wasn't wrong, so we relented. Handy suggested we start our own church, but we decided that wouldn't satisfy the deal. We had to be inconveniencing another power. The plan we settled on was pretty dastardly. We checked the contract, and nothing specified that the victim of the robbery had to be unaware of the event. Nor did it state where the money had to come from. So while we couldn't technically steal from ourselves, there was a loophole. We went to Coyote with an idea. We would bring him an offering, then we would steal it from his altar and give it to capitalism. No other god would have gone along with it, but Coyote loved the idea, mostly because it made the alien spirit look foolish, and because we were basically cheating on our attempt at cheating. Plus, we promised him more booze. We were just relieved we didn't have to anger any gods. So, the next day, Tello brought an offering of golden trinkets to the node where we met Coyote and left it, loudly declaring it to be an offering to the trickster god. Immediately after she left, Weeb walked in and took the offering with an audible yoink. Coyote just laughed at our audacity, but capitalism was contractually obligated to be satisfied. All things considered, he was a pretty good sport. As the lord of deals and making money, he was also a lord of loopholes, and he appreciated a clever interpretation of the rules. In exchange for our offerings, the spirit of capitalism promised to help our efforts to infiltrate the technocracy, and said he would prevent any of their financial or bureaucratic attacks in the interim. Between him and the vampires, we felt much more fiscally secure. He left us with the blessing, "May you always have a second set of books." Having strengthened our defenses for the time being, Aoi reached out to the Incognitos, the Hollow One information brokers we had met at a coffee shop some weeks before. He was hoping to find a way to contact a group called the Virtual Adepts. They were supposed to be the most tech-savvy members of the Mage world. We knew that knowledge was power, and figured we could use more of it if we were to deal with the technocracy. Plus, they might have a way to find any video footage related to our Fey corpses. 2 birds with 1 stone. From the Incognitos, we got the address of a land center in the suburbs. We walked into a large room with computers arranged in rows along the walls, with a restroom and a closed door in the back. When the clerk asked us if we were there to play, we said we were just there for the art, and his attitude changed. He took us into the room at back, where we saw a bunch of VR headsets suspended from the ceiling, with gloves and joysticks attached. He helped us sign on, and when we asked what game we were playing, all he would say was, "The best." We hooked up and jacked on. When we did, we were transported to a street covered in neon lights, advertising everything you could imagine. The stores stretched into the distance, without pause, and we could see the street at one end curve up towards the top of a mountain, where it connected with other neon threads that we took to be other streets. From MeatSpace, the clerk informed us that we were in the digital web, and told us to enter the door next to us. When we stepped into the speakeasy, which was apparently called the Spy's Demise, we were glad for our lack of digital lungs. If we had physically been there, we would have choked to death on the clouds of smoke that filled the stereotypical sleazy dive. It was a large place, and all sorts of people were gathered at tables or bar stools, talking in little groups. Well, I say all sorts, but really there were 3 categories. People in black long coats and mirrored sunglasses, people in noir-style trench coats and fedoras, and people with cybernetic implants. As we took everything in, we noticed one of the fedora people trying to subtly wave us over. It wasn't very subtle, but no one else seemed to care. As we approached the man's table, we heard snippets of conversation. Lots of talk about zooterrorism and other things like hobgoblins just pouring out of the trees, and then the paradox backlash hit him. Crazy, man. Who knows where they came from, and the like. We didn't know exactly what they were talking about, but it seemed to be the topic on everyone's mind. The man we assumed to be a virtual adept greeted us in a very bad Humphrey Bogart impression, which he never dropped. "Hiya, sweethearts. How you doing? Take a seat. What can I do for you?" We explained that we were interested in finding information about murder potentially committed by vampires. At that word, conversation in the bar stopped dead, and everyone stared at us for a minute, then turned back to their conversations. Apparently they were a sensitive subject. Given that we were semi-hunting vamps, he seemed willing to help, but said that didn't explain why we had come to him. We mentioned that one of our party, Weeb, had also been looking to learn about correspondence, and not being a member of a tradition already, he thought he should talk to the ones best known for that sphere. The virtual adept was pleased by the compliment, and said that they were indeed able to teach us plenty. Sensing that he might want to join this organization, Alwi tried to perform a little rewind with his phone and cast a small spell on Weeb. In the bar, Weeb froze, while in Meatspace his body rewound and went through the last 5 seconds again. Alwi looked puzzled, until Bogey took pity on him and explained. This is the digital web. It's like the internet, but supercharged with magic. I could teach you how to access virgin territory, and you could set up a space for that store you told me about right here. You can do anything in there, sweetheart. You're in charge of the rules. But until then, if you come in here with a VR set like you did this time, your magic won't work right, see? It's not a one-to-one correspondence with the physical world. Mostly you'll try to cast it here, but only affect Meatspace. But eventually, you can enter holistically. Heck, some of us are here in our physical bodies. Wait, if some of you are here physically, does that mean you can jump into video games? Because if so, sign me the fuck up and I will do what I have to. Weeb slammed his fist on the table and seconded the motion. Surprised by the suddenness of the outburst, the virtual adept was nevertheless pleased at the prospect of 2 new recruits for his organization. In fact, he was so happy about it that he offered, for a modest fee of a few $100s, to have a few of his people dig around and see what video they could find of our murder victims. It wouldn't take long, as they tried to keep plugged into major metropolitan centers as a matter of course. Never knew when interesting information could turn up. It only took about an hour, and we sat around chatting about all the things we could get up to with our new virtual space. And then he got a text from one of his contacts. Before he could tell us what it was, however, a massive explosion rocked the bar. Everyone's hand went to their sidearms, katanas, ray guns, phasers, and so on, as the entire bar piled onto the street to see what was happening. Customers from other establishments up and down the street were doing the same. About a block away, we saw the source of the commotion. A large, blue, mean-looking figure stood on the street. It had light blue skin and a dark blue woolen mass where its torso should be, and was throwing cartoonish bombs all around. Every time one of the bombs hit, the people caught in the blast would glitch out and de-res. It didn't look like they were suffering any damage, but the screams of pain seemed real enough. As we started to call on our magics and draw our weapons, readying for a fight, the local security drones beat us to it. Several robotic forms lurched from nearby doorways, and a squadron of drones descended from on high. A solid minute of concentrated machine gun fire, or whatever the digital equivalent was, absolutely shredded the thing, leaving only a pile of ones and zeros in the approximate shape of chunky salsa before it faded from view. Everyone around us stood down, relieved that the local security had done its job. Well, we actually found the whole thing a bit anticlimactic, but we did find it a comforting thought to know we weren't the only targets of Marauder nonsense. At least, we were pretty sure it was a Marauder attack, based on the number of the people in the crowd who identified the blue creature as a known Marauder terrorist. We filed back into the bar, along with our shaken virtual adept friend. He confirmed the identity of the attacker, and told us that Marauder assaults had been increasing all over the world, from hobgoblins in New York to griffins in Central Europe. Everyone was concerned, from the traditions to the unaffiliated sorcerers, and even the technocracy. When he mentioned that last group, he gestured to a few of the figures sitting at nearby tables, who nodded in reply. We immediately flinched, and everybody started reaching for weapons. But Bogey stopped us, saying the spy's demise was neutral territory. When we expressed surprise at his nonchalance at the enemy, the VA said we had it all wrong. The technocracy aren't insane. Heck, a lot of them are good folks. Half the people here are technocrats. Most of the time, they just have a different take on things, sweethearts. It's like atheists versus people of faith. So long as neither party's a douchebag trying to force other people to believe their way, they can get along just fine. Besides, you'll soon learn that the lines aren't as sharp as some people would have you believe. Not everything is as it seems, sweethearts. We were puzzled by that, but we took him at his word about the neutrality of the bar. Besides, at that point, he reminded us of the information that had been gathered. He pulled up a video of the club where Jessie, the female Fae victim, had last been seen alive. We watched on a traffic light camera as she walked away from the club with the 2 men and woman that the bartender had told us about. Everything seemed fine at first, until one of the men dropped behind her a step, slapped something over the girl's mouth, and tossed her into a van waiting on the curb. The rest piled in and quickly pulled away. From there we shifted from camera to camera, following the van along the street as it drove to the International Bank where we had met the vampires, who we had decided were far too cool to be our murderers. We all felt foolish as we watched the 3 figures, one of whom we now recognized as the vampire's receptionist, carry a bulky object into the bank, then carry it out again about 10 minutes later. We saw as they drove back to the alley near the club, dumped the body, and finally drove to a nearby parking garage, where it appeared that they parked the van and left on their own. Apparently, our vampire bros were fey killers after all. Unless, as Weeb suggested, they were being framed. After all, we knew the receptionist wasn't a vampire, so it must be some sort of insidious human plot. Or maybe mind control. Obviously, we had to confront these 3 people and find the real killers. Several members of the party jumped on that explanation in a noble attempt to defy reality. You could say a lot of things about the Iron Goldfish, but we were loyal to our friends. We thanked Bogey for his help, and he made arrangements with Weeb and Alwi to get them VR sets to log into the digital web and set up a time to meet the rest of the local tradition members. Then we logged out and went to save our vampire buddies from their nefarious receptionist. Knowing where the van was parked, and figuring that the 3 kidnappers mostly operated at night, that was when the killings had happened anyway, we decided to stake the place out. We parked in the garage where we had a decent view of the van and settled in to wait. Tello and Bard had brought books. The rest of us napped or played on our phones. We didn't even see the people arriving until we heard the slam of the car door. Professional investigators, that's us. I don't know how they missed the 3 cars with people sitting in them, but probably the kidnappers weren't expecting trouble, and so weren't on their guard against any observers. Fortunately, there was no way the receptionist and her kidnapper cronies could get away. Before we had settled in to wait, while we knew our quarry was nowhere around, we had broken into their van. Weeb removed the timing belt from the engine, and Alwi aged one of the locks into decrepitude and broke in, looking for evidence. We didn't find anything that cleared the vampires, although there were several rolls of duct tape, tarps, handcuffs, zip ties, and all sorts of abductor paraphernalia. But we already knew these guys were kidnapping murderers, so it wasn't any help. We closed the van back up, but we stole the radio first so the trip wasn't a waste. That's why, when the vicious murderers came up to their rape van in the middle of the night, the first thing we heard was, "What the hell? We've been robbed!" That was our cue. We emerged from our cars and approached as stealthily as we could. Kitty had provided us with enhanced stickers, in the shape of cat's paws, to make us move more sneakily. That's how we were able to get pretty close before they spotted us. Kitty, moving quicker than the rest of us, circled around to the kidnapper's personal car and removed the timing belt like he had seen Weeb do. Then he opened the door and started rifling through their information, leaving the actual fight to the rest of us. Fortunately for him, they had spotted the main party before he started his perusal, so no one had any attention to spare for him. As we approached, several of us used our various mage senses to try to see what sort of night folk these people were. There did seem to be something odd about them, but so far as we could tell, they were just regular humans. That theory lasted until Bard got punched in the face. Deciding to take advantage of the element of surprise, he muttered, "Strength of Hercules," and charged the group from the rear. They saw him coming, and his opening haymaker missed one of the men, who ducked and returned the favor, breaking Bard's nose. Thereupon he loudly declared that these guys were in fact enhanced in some way, shape, or form, and that they were cheaters. After a little screaming and clutching his face, Bard shouted back at the man, "Your mother wears combat boots!" Forcing an image of the man's mother, nude except for the aforementioned footwear, into the fore of his mind. He grasped his head in agony. Taking advantage of the distraction Bard's charge had provided, Critical snuck up and whacked one of the men on the back of the head with his sap. That should have dropped a normal human, but this one just yelled, "Ouch!" and turned to glare at Critical. Then Handy shot him with an arrow. The man didn't even deign to notice, instead pulling a dagger and striking out at Critical. He cut across Critical's stomach, but the mage's mage armor, i.e. magically reinforced clothing, held and he was fine. The rest of us, seeing that, figured that bringing mage armor would have been a smart idea, if only someone had happened to mention it. Jerk. Inspired by Critical's hardened clothes, Tello reinforced her magic with her willpower and turned the receptionist's clothes into cast iron. The woman dropped immediately, pinned by her own blouse and skirt. We were surprised it worked, given the apparent sleeper, i.e. non-mage, nature of these people. The presence of sleepers tended to reinforce the norms of consensus reality. Just one more indication that these folks weren't what they seemed. Deciding that subtlety was overrated, Weeb decided to try a new martial arts technique he had invented with the help of Archimedes, the Hermetic Master of Forces. Way of the Exploding Fist. It was exactly what it said on the tin. He raced up and punched one of the men in the face, accompanying the strike with an explosion. Weeb wasn't damaged by his own magic, but the kidnapper was and reeled backwards. Weeb called on him to surrender. "Never! I will serve my masters to the death," he snarled. Seeing that Weeb was having success where his attempts hadn't, Critical retreated from the fight and shifted his efforts to warping luck and probability around the martial artist. The effect was noticeable, as suddenly Weeb couldn't miss a strike if he tried, and he always seemed to hit a pressure point or nerve cluster. Despite the man's flailing around with his dagger, it was only a handful of seconds before Weeb's antagonist dropped to the ground. Handy, deciding that reality had stopped giving a damn long ago, magically pulled a boxing glove from his bag and stuck it on the end of an arrow, which he fired at our last standing foe. Unfortunately, gravity was still paying attention for the moment, and the boxing glove arrow plonked to the ground a few yards short of its intended target. The man just stared, incredulous. Seizing the moment, Bard swung at him with the full strength of his superhero-inspired muscles and connected with a solid punch. The man felt it, but ultimately didn't seem much more than mildly inconvenienced. Bard resolved to hit the gym in the future. He did manage to dodge the man's dagger and shouted a mangled insult about the man's father being a cheap prostitute. The mental magic worked despite the poor delivery, and the mental damage proved too much. The man dropped to the ground, bleeding from the ears. Bard was giggling in ecstasy. "I've finally done it! At long last, my dream has been realized! I've insulted a man to death! I pulled a Zhuge Liang!" Despite the fact that we had been planning on taking the kidnappers alive and turning them over to the police, 2 of the group were dead and 1 was struggling to breathe, pinned to the ground by her metal shirt. "What are you people doing? I thought you were working with my masters. I thought you were on our side." "Well, crap baskets. So much for our frame-up theory. We asked which masters specifically she meant, hoping against hope, but she identified the 2 old codgers from the consulting firm. She had heard them say that we were mages, and since her masters were vampiric mages, masters of blood magic, she thought we had intentionally sought them out and were working together. "Well, we didn't want to betray your masters, but there's kind of an issue with the whole kidnapping and murder thing," Tello explained. "See, we were called up by the people you've been preying on, and they said we were obligated, by an ancient contract, to help protect them from you." "Wait, are we not even getting paid?" We've asked incredulously. Bard responded, "No, they just said it was our duty based on the contract, and we didn't want to piss off a Fey Lord." "Yeah, none of you guys are ever being left in charge again." While this exchange was going on, the woman on the ground watched intently. "So, does all that mean you're going to try to kill my masters? Because if so, please don't kill me yet. I really want to see what they do to you." "Well, we'd rather not fight them," Weeb returned. "Because they're awesome. Also because they would probably redecorate the office with our internal organs, but he didn't feel the need to say that. Still, we couldn't come up with any workable plan to get them to stop attacking the Fae without violence. They didn't seem likely to do it if we just asked nicely, and if they found out we'd been sent by the Fae Lord, they were liable to turn on us. Plus, the captured woman swore she was going to tell her masters unless we killed her. It wasn't a smart thing to say, considering her situation, but she may have been banking on us being too good to kill someone who wasn't actively trying to kill us. Unfortunately, she was right. Pondering hard, Bard came up with an idea. What if we could do to her what the Fey magic had done to us? With his mind magic, he could probably erase her memory of the last several minutes, wiping the attack from her mind. The rest of the party quickly picked up on this idea and ran with it. The final plan we came up with was to wipe the receptionist's memories, then race back to her vampire bosses at the bank. We would barge in and tell them we knew all about them being vampires, but we were cool with it. Some other group wasn't, however, and we had intercepted an attack on the vampire's human accomplices, which she helpfully told us were called ghouls. We had fought off this group of hostile mages, but only managed to save the receptionist, and had brought a warning to the vamps so they could get out of town. Surprisingly enough, our half-baked plan worked. Not only did the two old vampires believe us, but as they hurriedly threw some folders into boxes and shredded others, they swore an official oath to repay us for our friendship whenever they got set up in a new town. We were a little shocked that they didn't try to fight, but they said they preferred to keep under the radar. It was a lot safer. Not that mages themselves were necessarily a problem, but they might have ties to vampire hunters. Besides, they needed to keep the masquerade intact, whatever that was. We left them to their flight and congratulated ourselves on a job well done. Or, a job done, at least. We could only hope that Lord Archaon and the rest of the Fae would be okay with only running the vampires out of town. I mean, we never actually said we would kill them, just that we would take care of the problem. And they would have to agree that we did, right? Right. Secure in our technical correctness, several of us split off to work on setting up a digital web space for the shop, the portal to which Weeb insisted on referring to as a webway gate for some reason, and the rest retired to their own individual projects until it was time to meet again. Will the Fae accept this outcome? Have the Iron Goldfish made a new enemy in service to their vampiric friends? And what will the Marauders attack next? Find out in the next Mage Storytime.